Collision theory states that particles must collide and with enough energy to react. The minimum amount of energy for these reactants to do this is called the activation energy. To increase the rate of reaction, the frequency of these successful collisions must increase. You can achieve this by increasing surface area of solid reactants, concentration of solutions, pressure of gases. If you heat the reactants, this causes the particles to move faster so they collide more frequently, but it also results in these collisions being more likely to be successful, as they're more likely to have that activation energy. The thing is that the particles in the reactants will have a range of kinetic energies as they're constantly colliding with each other and transferring energy. Have you ever wondered why a puddle of water will evaporate even though it's well below 100 degrees C? Well, that's because at any given time there will be some particles that are at that temperature, that do have enough energy to escape. The Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution curve helps us visualize this. The higher the point on the line, the more particles have that certain energy. If we put a line at the energy required for water particles to evaporate, we see that there's a relatively small number of particles that have at least this energy, and they evaporate. If the average temperature of the water increases, the peak lowers, but it broadens and shifts to the right, so more particles have this minimum energy. And so it is the case with activation energy too. The higher the temperature, the more likely particles are to have the minimum energy needed to react when they collide. If you have a graph showing how much product is made by a reaction over time, it will usually be a curve that flattens out at the top, showing that the reaction has reached its endpoint. The rate of reaction is given by the gradient at any point, which means you'll have to draw a tangent on the curve at the time at which you're trying to find the rate, and the unit of which will always be the quantity measured, for example centimeters cubed if gas produced, divided by time, usually in seconds. A catalyst increases the rate of reaction by providing an alternative reaction pathway with a lower activation energy. It isn't a reactant though, so it experiences no overall chemical change between the start and end of a reaction. Lower activation energy means that the line on the Maxwell-Boltzmann distribution curve is now further to the left, so more particles have the minimum energy needed to react. If a catalyst is in the same state as the reactants, or we can say phase at A level, it's a homogeneous catalyst. In this case, the reaction proceeds through an intermediate species just means an atom, an ion molecule or something, with lower energy and usually involves multiple steps. Looking at an NG profile, this looks like a normal activation energy has been split into multiple steps, each with a lower activation energy, meaning particles are more likely to be able to have that energy and react. If the catalyst isn't in the same phase as the reactants, it's a heterogeneous catalyst, usually a solid. It provides active sites on its surface where reactants undergo adsorption, not absorption. For example, gaseous atoms weakly bonding to the metal atoms. The reaction takes place and the product is released from the catalyst. That's desorption. The strength of adsorption is important as it needs to be strong enough to adsorb the reactants, but weak enough to release the product once made. In practice, catalysts are very useful as they reduce the energy requirements for industrial chemical processes, and they can reduce pollution, for example, catalytic converters in cars. Enzymes are biological catalysts and are crucial to every biological process. Some reactions are reversible, meaning that once a product is made, it can revert back to its original reactants. Such reactions will appear to stop when there's no further change in the amount of product or reactants. We say appear to stop as both the forward and reverse reactions are still happening, but they're happening at the same rate. There's no more overall change. The system has reached equilibrium. If you change a condition at this point though, the rates will no longer be equal, and so there will be an observable change, that is, until equilibrium is once again reached, but now with different amounts of products and reactants. Le Chatelier's principle says as much. When a change is applied to a system in dynamic equilibrium, the system reacts in such a way to oppose the effect of the change. In essence, that means if you change something that makes it easier for the forward reaction to happen, its rate will increase, more product will be made, then equilibrium will be reached once more. We say that the position of equilibrium has been shifted to the right. One obvious way of doing this is to remove the product once made, making it easier for more to be made. Obviously, the opposite is true if you remove reactants instead. If you have fewer moles of product compared to reactants, we can think of it like diffusion. It's easier to make a few moles rather than a greater number of moles. Therefore, if we increase the pressure if it's a gaseous reaction, the position of equilibrium is once again shifted to the right here. We'll have a greater yield of product once equilibrium is reached. Temperature also affects the position of equilibrium. If the forward reaction is exothermic, that is a negative enthalpy change. then it gets harder for the reaction to happen and release that heat energy the hotter the system gets. If you remove heat from the system, it makes it easier for this to happen. The position of equilibrium is shifted to the right again here. The opposite is true for the reverse reaction, which will have to be endothermic in this case. However, temperature does also increase the rate of reaction, as you know. This means equilibrium will be reached quicker with an increased temperature. That's why for the Haber process, say, you want a high pressure to get a high yield of ammonia, as there's fewer moles of it than the reactants, and ideally a low temperature as the forward reaction is endothermic. Problem is that if you go too cold, the rate of reaction is so slow that it takes too long for the product to be made, so a compromised temperature is used. Concentration of solutions does not affect the position of equilibrium, nor does the presence of a catalyst. They merely affect the rate of reaction. The equilibrium law is this, square brackets denotes concentration of a substance, by the way. The product of the products, that is, multiplied, raised to the power of their numbers of moles divided by the same as that of the reactants is equal to a constant. This constant is called Kc, and it's called the equilibrium constant, naturally. When a reaction involves gases, while we can use Kc, a better constant is Kp, which involves partial pressures. To find the partial pressure for a gas in the reaction, we take the total pressure and multiply by its number of moles relative to the other reactants or products. The equation to calculate Kp looks then almost identical to that for Kc, just with partial pressures instead of concentrations. The rate equation links the rate of a reaction to the concentration of the reactants involved. It often takes the form rate equals the rate constant times the concentrations raised to the power or order of the number of moles, but that's not always true. However, the exact equation for a reaction can only be determined experimentally to determine how each concentration affects the rate. We say the overall order is the sum of all orders. So how do we determine the order for each concentration experimentally then? Well, we carry out the same reaction several times, changing the concentration of the reactant we're concerned with. We can plot rate of reaction against concentration. If that gives you a straight line going up, it's first order. If it's a curve, we then plot the rate against concentration squared. If you get a straight line then, it's second order, and so on. Just be aware that sometimes the order won't be a whole number. If it's a first order reaction, plotting concentration against time shows exponential decay. This means that concentration decreases by the same proportion every chosen time interval, similar to radioactivity. So we can say that this also has a half-life. Find the half-life by going to a half, a quarter, an eighth, just to check they're all the same or similar and get an average if you want. The rate constant is then equal to the natural log of 2 divided by the half-life. Here's the full equation that describes the exponential decay, the Arrhenius equation. K is the rate constant again, A is a constant depending on the reaction, R is the gas constant, 8.13, T is temperature in Kelvin, and EA is activation energy. If we need to rearrange this to make EA, R, or T the subject, we divide by A, natural log both sides to get rid of the E, and we can also say that natural log of K divided by A is the same as natural log of K. These are what we call our log identities. Moving log A, I refuse to say ln by the way, it's still a log. To the other side, we can say that this is y equals mx plus c for a straight line graph. If log K is plotted on the y-axis, 1 over t on the x-axis, as it's on the bottom of the equation. The gradient, therefore, then is equal to minus EA over R. As many reactions involve several stages with their own rates and therefore rate constants, the overall rate is determined by the slowest step, the bottleneck. So I hope you found that helpful. Leave a like and a comment if you did, and don't forget to check out our revision app to help you test your knowledge. Links in description.